All right, hello, welcome. My name is Shaina. I'm an astrologer, and today we are talking about Neptune transiting through the houses, okay? So as you guys know, there was a big shift recently. Neptune changed from Pisces to Aries. This is a big deal. If you haven't seen my video about it, I'll link it in the cards. But if you've already watched my video and you kind of have heard a lot about these Neptune shifts and you're wanting to know how it affects you personally, then that's what this video is all about. Now, before I get any further into this video, let me just get the advertising out of the way. So I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. If you do not want to have to decipher your own transits or you want a more customized transit reading, I offer that on my website, as well as obviously, regular birth chart readings, synastry readings, tarot readings, a bunch of other readings on there. And I also have an astrology TikTok where I go live. Currently I go live every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, but I always keep my bio updated on TikTok with the next time I'm about to go live, so you can always just check that there. But I basically do like mini readings on my TikTok, and it's been so fun doing those and like hanging out with you guys, and I really do look forward to it. And I've been doing it pretty consistently now, so it's been really cool. And obviously I also post astrological content on my TikTok as well, which is at shaina.emily. Did I say that? I'm not sure, but now I did. Okay, but yes, getting into this video about Neptune transiting the houses. So if you do not know what house your Neptune is transiting through, I actually already went over how to find it in the previous video. So definitely, again, I already linked that video in the cards. I'll also link it down below in the description bar. And it's the very last little timestamp. I personally use the Placidus system. I do not use the whole sign system. So you do have to do a little bit more calculations. And also just a reminder, this is not Neptune natally through the houses. And if you do not know, again, about like Neptune, what Neptune represents, what transit Neptune represents, all that kind of stuff, I have already gone over that in the previous video, the same one I keep referencing. Check that out if you have any questions. I just wanted to make this video jumping right in to Neptune transiting through the houses. Now, this is a timeless video, okay? Yes, Neptune is transiting Aries right now, but if you watch this in another 14 years or whatever it may be, I still want it to be relevant. And if you want to know more specifically, but you don't understand how to interpret, that's what I sell readings for. So there you go. Neptune transiting your first house. So let's start with coming from the 12th house. So this is really, I think, the end of a cycle and the start of a new one. Truly, when Neptune or any outer planet at all transits from the 12th house and then it breaks through, kind of is how I see it, to the first house, right? The 12th house is like the womb and where things have been incubating. So I feel like your Neptune has like been incubating in the 12th house for a while. And when it goes into the first house, it's time to be birthed. It's time to be birthed and put that Neptune out there to the world and display it on your face and out in front of you instead of kind of just keeping it hidden away, tucked away inside your room somewhere, right? And what I mean by that with Neptune specifically being the cycle, Neptune is all about spirituality and religion and faith. So maybe this is a situation where you just previously went through a situation where you found new religious or spiritual or faith beliefs, and maybe you've been kind of keeping it a little bit private. When Neptune transits over your first house, you probably will be putting it out there a little bit more, talking about it a little bit more, right? Maybe dressing a little bit more like it, right? Maybe you had these really deep spiritual religious beliefs, but you only kind of did it in your room in private. Now when Neptune goes through your first house, maybe you're going to dress like, the vibe a little bit more, right? Even just in general with Neptune going through the first house, you're going to be dressing a little bit more, like, how do I describe Pisces? Like laid back, hot mess, effortless chic on its good days, and Cookie Monster pajama pants on its on its chill days, and on its bad days, the same pants it's worn for like the past 3 weeks, But basically, coming from your 12th house again, the elusive dreaminess and escapism that you've experienced the last decade or so is now becoming more of your personality, and you're becoming more upfront with it, right? Everything you've developed in private is now being put on display. Also, I can't say this is a situation, like another way that this can translate, I think, is getting addicted to substances or having some kind of substance dependency while your Neptune is in your 12th house. And then, you go to AA and then you become this like born again Christian when Neptune's like just going over your first house. And then when it enters your first house, you're this like born again Christian who like heals those that have also been through this Neptune in the 12th house transit and experienced a similar issue with substance, abuse. That could be a potential as well. Whatever it is, you found your spirituality, you found your dreaminess. Now it's time to own it. Now it's time to do something with it. Now it's time to be more active with it, right? I also said I also said, you just got out of the psych ward / prison. Now what, right? Neptune has moved from your 12th house and is entering your first. So what are themes of Neptune in the first house? You know, this is all about creating a new spiritual or religious identity, dissolving what you thought you knew you were and creating this new person, right? Neptune is like, oh, you thought you knew yourself? You thought you knew your identity? You thought you knew you? Yeah, right, motherfucker, you don't. Neptune's going through your first house and everything you once thought you knew about yourself is going to be changed. Also, there may be like a feeling of like reclaiming your identity after you've lost it. This may go more towards like maybe the second half or middle of this Neptune transit going through your first house, you know, whenever that happens. You may feel like you need to start reclaiming your identity. And that can be because you lost your identity, because there can be this newfound projection issues when Neptune goes in the first house. People will start projecting things onto you, assuming things about you, placing these idealizations upon you, and will be confused if you do not fit them, if you do not match up with them, right? And sometimes because you are going through this basically identity crisis. Like, why didn't I just start with that? Neptune in the first house is like having an identity crisis. Like, it is a phase, mom. You know what I mean? And embrace the phase. That's okay, you know? Projection issues, though. Like, this is like totally somebody that during this transit, you're going to probably get manic pixie dream girled a few times in various ways. This can even be, like, I feel like manic pixie dream girls is so, like, more than just in dating. Like, I feel like this can happen at your job, right? Maybe people see you, oh, you're perfect for this job, right? And you're like, oh my God, are you really actually seeing me for who I am? I guess I can try to do this job, right? Like, that's kind of being manic pixie dream girls, you know? And I feel like that's very Neptune in the first house. But just basically, while Neptune goes through the first house, you may not be sure who you are fully. So you might take on more of the projections of what people think you are around you, and you might try to wear them on for size because you are trying to find a new identity, so why not give it a little try? But then you might realize, this outfit doesn't fit. It's actually not as comfortable as I once thought it was, right? And then when you maybe, you know, I'm using outfits as a metaphor, but it could be a little literal sometimes. You know, Neptune in the first house is very much the way you dress. But anyways, so, you know, maybe you take the outfit off and you change, and then, or you're in a relationship, right? And then your partner's like, why aren't you who I thought you were? Why aren't you this idea that I placed upon you? I thought you were this person. Why are you changing, right? And you can be like, oh, well, it just, you know, didn't really work out. And it can be this weird confusion. And sometimes it can feel like this letdown, right? Maybe sometimes you feel like you're being put on a pedestal, and maybe you feel like that's a long way to fall when inevitably you do. So there can be some crash out moments, you know? I think in general, you'll have a much more spiritual and creative outlook on life. You will see things through a lot more of like a glimmery lens. I wonder if while Neptune was going through your 12th house, you know, your inside world was very vivid and magical and amazing because the outside world just felt very drab and shallow. And maybe when Neptune moves into your first house, it's like this, the light turns back on. Wow, everything has this really nice soft lens filter on it. Everything has this dim, you know, soft effect on it. How beautiful, how amazing, how lovely, right? So you can see things through rose-tinted glasses, right? Classic Neptune in the first house. So just be cautious. You can really have this filter and idealization on things. And potentially when your Neptune moves into your second house, which won't be for a while, I'll assume, especially if you're at the beginning of this transit, then, you know, you have a little bit of time to still see things through that lens, but just be ready for things to kind of take on a different viewpoint when Neptune goes through your second house. But Neptune is all about different lenses and filters, so it's not about one being right or wrong. I'm just pointing it out, I guess, you know, in a neutral way. You're going to be much more sensorially aware of your environment, right? So you're going to become much more sensitive to the people and the things and the vibes around you. You know, maybe you'll be able to kind of pick up on vibes, especially if you're like an Aries rising. You'll probably be able to pick up on vibes more than you ever have been able to before, right? Let's be honest, if you are an Aries rising, which most of you probably are when you're watching this video at this moment in time, that are about to be going through this transit, coming up pretty soon. And let's be honest, Aries risings have no social awareness most of the time. You know, not by any fault of their own, really, but they usually don't. And so with that Neptune going through the first house, you'll kind of become more empathetically aware, sensorially aware for the first time. You'll find yourself steamrolling less through situations and circumstances and really feeling it out and becoming more aware of what's going on around you for the first time, which might be kind of jolting at first for some Aries risings. This is normal for the Pisces risings that have been going through this, though, I will say that. There may be less of a confidence or assertion than you're used to, right? Because you're so aware sensorially of what's going on around you, the vibes and how people are feeling, you start to maybe not feel like, should I speak up? as much as I used to, especially for an Aries rising, right? Should I interrupt? I don't know. That would be kind of rude maybe, right? So you might become less confident, less assertive. You might become maybe a little bit more even self-conscious or self-aware than you ever have been, potentially. You may feel like normal things are dull and boring and you're always searching for something grander and greater. Wanting your real life to become, that's a great way to put it, Shaina. Wow, Shaina, yes. Wanting that fantasy world that you created when Neptune was going through your 12th house to become your actual reality of what you're going through. And you want it to be what's actually physically around you now, right? So if you dreamed and fantasized of living in a forest with the frogs, me too. Very much my shirt. Then maybe a Neptune goes through your first house. That's what you want your physical surroundings to look like. It doesn't mean they will. You'll have to look at other transits to see if that Neptune illusion becomes a reality, but that'll probably be something that you want to manifest physically, because that's what Neptune in the first house is. Those things manifesting physically, More themes of martyrdom, right? You needing help from others and others looking to you for help. There'll be more of an exchange of that in the physical. Maybe when Neptune was going through your 12th house, you were either forced to be codependent on somebody for some reason, or for some reason you required to be codependent on somebody for some reason, or you felt very helpless and you felt like you needed to be codependent on someone even though you didn't have that available, right? When Neptune goes into the first house, that help becomes more available and more in your control, right? So now you become the person that gets to decide, do I give this help to this person or not? Do I accept this help from this person or not? So in that way, I think it can be a very positive thing to transition from. It is giving very like bleeding heart, healing the world sort of energy. Now with it going through Aries, the way that you do that might be through like odd ways, like bloodshed and violence, but you're going to be more easily deceived and more easily manipulated. And you are going to more easily deceive others and more easily manipulate others as well. Check that you're not becoming too dependent on people, but trust your intuition, develop your gut, or actually the gut feeling and the gut intuition that you developed in the 12th house. Now's the time to go with it. Now's the time to go after that and trust that. You may escape. Neptune is all about escaping. You may escape through creating different personalities, right? Kind of like what I talked at the beginning, as well as escaping through other people's problems. That may be another thing with Neptune in the first house. Like, oh, I don't like my problems. I don't want to deal with my issues. So I will escape through assisting you with yours. I think that's something Neptune in the first house does natally. And I think that might be something you do while it's going and transiting. So that is my little description of Neptune going through the first house. What are your experiences with Neptune going through your first house? If you're somebody that just went through this transit, or did you resonate with what I was talking about coming from the 12th house and into the first? I'd love to know in the comments. All right, Neptune transiting your second house. That means that you have just finished your Neptune in the first house transit, which I spoke about if you want to hear about that, because that was probably very relevant to your life. However, basically, you just kind of created this new identity, right? You've been through this wild spiritual crisis. I mean transformation. But it's time to create something physical and tangible with it, right? With Neptune moving from your first house to your second house, right? Now you know who you are, do something about it, make something about it, right? And also, now that you're not the same person that you were when Neptune was going through your first house, you're going to want your environment to match, right? Neptune was going through your first house and you probably took on this much more Neptunian sort of identity, whatever that means in your life, whether that be somebody more creative, artistic, spiritual, religious. What's another way Neptune could manifest physically? A bum, homeless. No. So now you've been through that spiritual transformation. It's time for your, environment and stuff to match, right? Now that you're like a spiritual woozy gal, you need the crystals, you need the prints, the art prints, you need the tarot decks to match, Okay, so now with Neptune moving through your second house, finances start to become foggy. Obviously, depending on the rest of your chart, but maybe in the past you knew kind of about finances, or you thought you did, or maybe it just didn't matter if you knew about them or not in the past, right? Now all of a sudden it's starting to matter and you're realizing that you have no idea. Or like maybe you thought you knew about finances, but now the world has changed so much that it's like, oh my God, I actually don't know about this stuff anymore. Or, you know, you're trying to do something new, like start a business, right? And you're like, oh my God, I actually have no idea how to do the financial end of these things, right? Finances become foggy, you know? Self-worth also becomes foggy because the principles that you once had all changed when Neptune was going through your first house. And I've been debating a lot more. And I think that also the second house rules our principles and our morals. And so when Neptune moves through your second house, you may not have the same principles, the same morals that you once held. You know, and I especially think principles and morals, especially around consumption, consumerism, you know, things of that nature that are especially prevalent right now in our society. This may be a little bit of like a loss of items and a reclaiming of items. This might be a situation where you give a lot of your items away or you lose a lot of your items to a situation, but what you gain is a lot of like spiritual transformation and spiritual health or guidance or something along those lines. This is definitely a time where you want to be aware of your mindset. If you have one of those, you know, broke mindsets, you know, with Neptune in the second house, you're going to be broke. If you have one of those, you know, rich girl, lucky girl person mindsets, then that's probably what's going to come to you, because with Neptune in the second house, it's all about the vibes, and the vibes basically directly relate to your finances. So if you're feeling all discouraged and feeling all broke and having that mindset, then that's probably what's going to happen. But if you're manifesting and really trying to manifest abundance, this is a transit where it's like that's when it has the potential for that stuff to fall in your lap. So it's all about your confidence, which I think is a lot to do with the second house. You may change jobs, and that is mostly because you may question the way that you make money. The way that you make money, maybe you can't make money that way anymore. Maybe your job has been dissolved. That's a very like Neptune in the second house thing. Your job is not needed anymore or something along those lines. You know, your clientele base is not around anymore or something along those lines could have happened. You realize that the way that you're making money is not aligning with your spiritual values or, you know, your moral compass or your religious beliefs or something along those lines, and you feel as though you can't make money that way right now. You know, I don't know the reason, but there is a big potential for there to be some reason as to, you know, maybe changing or adjusting the way you make money and the way that you spend money. This can be a time where money just flows and you don't know where it goes, and that's another thing. Be cautious of scammers, be cautious of schemes, be cautious of, you know, MLMs or whatever other name that those things go by, pyramid schemes, Ponzi schemes, those kinds of things. You are honestly so susceptible to those things when Neptune goes through your second house. You know, I wonder who those scammers that impersonate me on TikTok, who they get to buy those readings. And it's probably people with Neptune in the second house or people with Neptune transiting their second house or eighth house. But like, you know, like, let's be honest, right? So this is just, you know, me trying to say, be wary. You may want to make money through some kind of artistic way. So if you're an artist and you're wanting to make money, this can be a very beneficial transit to you. However, this can be a transit where it starts out with you doing a lot of free work, free labor. So that is something to be wary of. Don't give away too much free labor, too much free work. As an artist, you're preaching to the choir here. We tend to have to do that at first, right? But after a while, make sure that you make money. Make sure that you get your worth, right? Neptune in the second house can really dissolve the boundaries with finances. So you need to make sure that you have some level of boundaries up when it comes to making money, right? This can be somebody that is a nail tech and their clients always cancel at the last second. And instead of charging a fee because they canceled the last second, they just let them get away with it. But then they wind up losing so much money and, you know, getting really behind with clients and all this stuff. And so it just winds up messing up their business in all actuality because they didn't set certain boundaries of something as simple as, you know, having some kind of fee or, you know, losing you know, having some kind of deposit or something that, you know, whatever it is, so that you have some kind of protection over your resources, right? That's what you will need to do when Neptune goes through your second house, but that may be what you feel like you cannot do. This can also be a situation where your family asks for money, where you need to ask your family for money, you know, back and forth kind of codependency themes like that for sure come up. Bumming money off of people can be a common theme with this transit. Even people bumming money off of you. is another common theme with this transit. You may become financially dependent on somebody, or they may become financially dependent onto you. The things that you buy may have a more religious or spiritual or like, you know, fantasy artistic kind of lens to them. This could even be somebody that has absolutely no interest in art, but they wind up getting a ton of money and everybody tells them, you know, art is an amazing thing to invest in. You should start investing into art. And so even though they're a businessman, while Neptune goes through their second house, they start, I don't know, I'm pretending like I understand rich people. So then they start, you know, buying these rich artist pieces, right? You know what I mean? And then that's how their Neptune translates. So even though maybe they're not the most Neptunian spiritual person, because not everybody with these Neptune transits will be, for some reason, the items that they start taking in and acquiring have some sort of disillusioned Neptunian artistic spiritual you know, edge on it, right? Your confidence might be a little shakier. That may be kind of the most mundane way that is very relatable that it shows up for a lot of people, if that makes sense. Because everybody's in a very different financial situation, right? Just feel like your confidence is built on shakier foundations than you thought it was, right? You may care less on the physical. This is a good thing, I actually think. I think that this is a transit where you want to spend less money on physical items and more money on experiences, which I think can be a very positive way that this translates, right? Maybe this is somebody who's like really a curmudgeon, saves all their money, stores it away. They've got some Virgo energy, maybe in the 8th house right now. And when Neptune transits their second house, maybe they're finally like, maybe I should start like going to concerts or like buying or like going to the flower gardens with my girlfriend, like, you know what I mean? Or like, maybe I should start trying to spend money on experiences, Neptune, seeing the ocean, seeing the mountains, you know, like that's very like Piscean, appreciating the view, right? In ways that they never have before. So I think that is a beautiful way that this transit can translate. So also spending money on Neptunian things can go as far as like buying stage sticks to buying, you know, Bibles to buying drugs. Like, you know, it's one of those three, right? Definitely less superficial. I have found that this placement does forget to shower natally. So I would definitely, when Neptune's transiting your second house, you know, I would just try to remember to shower a little bit more. You know, I think it's good that this placement is a little less superficial, but sometimes it can go really far. It can go, you know, and pick up the dog poop in your house, you know, shower at least, you know, maybe once, twice a week, right? Definitely something to keep in mind with, I'm being serious, with Neptune going through your second house. You may struggle making grounded life decisions, especially financially. You know, I could see you making very big risks. This is definitely a time where, you know, the money that you thought you once had can be dissolved or lost. That's why I said watch out for scammers of any kind, form, or shape. I tend to find maybe you might escape more through online shopping or video games. I tend to find those are kind of the two ways that Neptune, the second house, tends to escape, right? Escape the physical second house through something Neptunian, video games. Plus, I tend to find people with Neptune, the second house, tend to have, at least natally, tend to have like a lot of money on their video games, but no money in real life, right? Very Neptune in the second house. But yeah, definitely online shopping too, like buying things you don't need. But yes, so you can let me know your experience if you just went through this transit or if you're about to go through this transit down below, because I would be so curious to know, do these themes resonate? Does this feel like what's going to come up for you in the next, you know, coming years? All right, Neptune moving through the third house. So when Neptune moves through the third house, that means it just came from your second house. Now that you know what it's like to have both nothing and everything, it's time to give back to your community. Now that you have new values, right? It's time to share them, you know, talk about them, get your values out there, right? I'll try to say this really fast. You know, Neptune going from the 12th house to the first house, you have a spiritual awakening. You have a new sound sense of self. We'll just say you're a yogi, right? Neptune going through your 12th house, you buy crystals, you start making, you know, content about being a yogi, producing physical things about yoga, right? Making a yoga mat maybe that you sell, right? And then when Neptune moves through your third house, now it's time to move to a community that is a yogic community, right? I'm tired of living in the city. Why am I a yoga girl that lives in the city? This doesn't make any sense. Let's move to someplace, you know, spiritual bougie and live in a commune somewhere, you know? It's a very like literal, like kind of nail on the head way to explain Neptune transits. I'm not like, not everybody goes through it in such an intense way, but maybe that example you can kind of metamorphosize to kind of like your life. You know what I mean? Neptune in the third house is all about rethinking belief systems. As I mentioned, in the second house, maybe you have, I think the second house can also talk about like morals and principles that you're like super fixed on, especially around consumerism, second house. So maybe now when Neptune moves in your third house, you're rethinking how you want to live in a community. Does that make sense? How should a community live? How should they work together? Also, this will really affect your mind mentally. You may feel like you have a lot more brain fog than normal. You may be a little bit more confused, a little bit more scatterbrained, a little bit more, it might be harder to focus when Neptune moves through your third house. Also, as far as like your local neighborhood and community, you may move a lot or have an unstable community, or maybe where you live, the neighborhood that you live is a little bit more Neptunian. Again, either spiritual, more commune-y, maybe a little bit more like, drug vibes, right? Like I had my Neptune in my third house last year for my solar return chart, and I live in a little bit of like a tweaker city, and I was like, that makes sense, right? Maybe you live in a town that's a little bit more run down. Maybe you live in a town that has some sort of spiritual significance, has some paranormal activity. Maybe you live in a town that's just a little bit neglected. That's another big theme with Neptune in the third house. Or maybe another big theme is like living in a religious community, a community like living in the Bible Belt, living in an environment that's like very, locally religious, right? Whatever the local religion is, they're very like big in. Does that make sense? You may actually get more involved in local religious organizations or local communities that go along with your belief system. Maybe you'll start going to church. Maybe you'll join your local Mason lodge. Maybe you'll start creating a group that meets every Wednesday that talks about tarot. Who knows? Maybe you'll start going to a yoga class Monday and Wednesdays, and that really becomes a little bit of like a sanctuary, an escape, or a retreat for you. Can be another big theme. You may be getting involved in more local creative classes. Maybe you'll go to a dance class and that you have the time of your life, right? But like I said, with the mind, dissolution of the thoughts and the mind, you may feel like Neptune can be a harsh energy. So you may feel like you're going a little crazy at times, right? This is like a mental crash out, kind of. Also, there may be a lot more manipulation, mental deception going on in your life. Maybe other people are deceiving with the things that they say or how they speak to you, and maybe you are doing the same as well. Maybe I'm just making up examples, right? Maybe you get a salesperson job and you have to kind of schmooze people. And so while your Neptune is going through your third house, you kind of, it's like the kind of used car salesman. Yeah, this is fine. Nothing to worry about that. You kind of manipulate the situation, can be, foggy, make it a little bit more nicer, right? Very Neptunian, right? Say things with a little bit more of a, a fog on them, a Neptunian filter on them that are a little bit nicer, a little bit sweeter, a little bit kinder, right? You can feel like you're going, you can feel like you're going crazy and losing your mind. Like this can be a situation where there can be some mental health struggles. I'll be honest with you. You can even maybe maybe you feel like you can't read or see anymore. But and you're like, well, how the fuck does that translate, right? And I was like, well, it makes sense if you were to like move to a different like country, or you move places, like because third house is a lot too with moving, and like you don't know the local language that much. So, you once knew how to read and you were like very literate, right? But with transit Neptune going through your third house, all of a sudden, you can't read what's around you. You can't read the signs. You don't know how to navigate around the area. That can be another thing with Neptune in the third house. I found people with Neptune in the third house either have an amazing sense of direction or an absolute atrocious sense of direction. And, because there's that Neptune going in there. So there's that like intuitive feature of like, I intuitively, instinctually know where I'm going. But also Neptune gets lost all the time. Oh, Neptune gets so lost. So just make sure that you take extra caution to know where you parked and to know where you're going. And, if you're doing acid, to not get lost in the forest, right? It's like that kind of energy, Another thought was like, maybe you did too many drugs and now you have holes in your brain and you can't really think right with Neptune going through your third house, right? But whatever it is, you're just like easily distracted now and you just can't really focus as easily as you were able to in the past. I also said like more experimenting with drugs, but in a very like, I see it as more like a fun recreational way, unless it's like a really, you have a bunch of stuff in your third house. In an empty third house with Neptune going through there, it's giving Coachella 2012. It can sometimes just be like fun, recreational, escapism, Neptune in the third house, but sometimes it can go really dark and it can be There is sometimes in an extreme situation, which I'm just talking extreme, so I'm not trying to scare you. It can equal some homelessness or some, you know, you're not really sure where you're living, or there's some question around where you're living, or question around if, you know, your lease is going to run up, or, you know what I mean? There can be just some mystery, I guess, around your like local community in your neighborhood as well. You may run late more or be more forgetful. This can also confront sibling relationships. Like there, sometimes with Neptune in the third house, I do see there being maybe some step siblings, some half siblings, some remarriages, you know, so there can be some themes around that in your immediate family. This can also be putting a new lens on your sibling relationships. Maybe there's a dissolution of one of the relationships, but maybe there's a more spiritual connection that you wind up gaining with another sibling, can be like a way this can translate. You also might find out that you have like another family, like in a very extreme way. Like again, you know, I try to go like as extreme and mundane as I can kind of come up with examples. So in an extreme way, this can be like, oh my gosh, like my dad was living a double life and he has another family, and I've been like, the wool's been pulled over my eyes, you know, or you can be the one living a double life and having a different family somewhere. You know, that's, I think, big themes with this energy, having a secret family, having, you know, knocking somebody up and not knowing how to tell somebody, finding, you know, a sibling on Reddit. It's like a very like Neptune in the third house thing. You may start being more misunderstood by others in conversation, and they may start misunderstanding you more. So you need to make sure, I think it can kind of feel like a little bit of a Mercury retrograde sometimes, this like Neptune in the third house transit. So you just have to be more careful, like not in every way, form, and shape, but like just being more careful and cautious, and like being more aware of the words that you're choosing to use, and what people are saying and what you're taking in, because you can assume things that aren't right. They can assume things that aren't right. There can be a lot of, you know, like verbal projections. Does that make sense? So you just need to be clear and expect to have to repeat yourself a lot, and expect to have to explain yourself more, and expect to need to give the same to others, which I think with Neptune in the third house, there can be a more empathetic way of speaking, and also a more like fantastical fairy tale, storytelling like way of speaking. Much more imaginative and creative mentally. Like if you're a writer, a poet, a creative director, something like that, this is a wonderful transit for you. You're going to wind up, you know, being around more eclectic artistic people. You're going to wind up being in more, you know, eclectic artistic environments. You're going to feel very like creatively stimulated. While you may have more troubles with things like math, you're going to have no issues creating wonderful stories, and, you know, and coming up with all these like creative ideas, right? You're going to connect more to the lyrics of music. You know, it's giving couch surfing on tour. You know, it is. Definitely more of a focus on mental health and mental illness. And I said, this is something small, but a hand to God, you guys are going to relate when you hear this. I found that people with Neptune in the third house natally wind up escaping by doing little errands around the neighborhood and pacing around the room lost in thought. I tend to find that that's how they escape, like by these like little mini grocery trips, right? Instead of getting a bunch of groceries, getting a few things, getting this around the neighborhood, getting that, right? And that's how you escape. That's how you avoid responsibility. You know, pacing around the room with your headphones on, creating these fantastical storylines to these songs you listen to is very much maybe the kind of vibe that you're in when Neptune transits your third house. But yes, let me know your experience with Neptune transiting maybe your second house going into your third house. Do you resonate with this stuff? Neptune moving through your fourth house. I do think this one can be a little bit of a doozy. I'm going to be honest with you. I do think the other ones, it's easier to kind of, I'm going to be honest, it's easier to find the positives in. And maybe I didn't sound that positive, but like, I do think there are positives to it. But this one is a little, I do think it's a little trickier, I'll be honest. So coming from the third house, you probably went through a dissolution of your neighborhood, local community, and or immediate family. Maybe you moved, maybe you found out about your family secret, you know, past or whatever it may be. Maybe you are moved into a more spiritual community, you know, all those kinds of themes. You also went through this intense thought transformation that it's now time to make it a lifestyle, right? This can also be somebody that was now, you know, diagnosed with some kind of like mental illness or some kind of mental health thing or something along those lines. It's going to be mental because it's the third house. And now it's about, you know, accepting that diagnosis and living with it can be like also a theme. Like, okay, now that I have ADD, now that I have autism, now that I know that I have this thing and I have a label for it, how do I kind of step into living with it for the rest of my life. You know, I feel like it's kind of like Neptune in the 4th house. Neptune transiting the 4th house. So this is a loss of home or family, a dissolving of home or family potentially. You know, this can be somebody that becomes very disillusioned by the family. Usually there's a situation like maybe a crisis at home that causes you to have to lend a lot of help and care to your family or to your roots, or in some way, form, or shape to the home. You know, maybe you just got diagnosed with something, and so now you're having to kind of, you know, you're staying home and you're reconciling with it. Maybe you just found out that your mom is pregnant and she's having another kid, and now you're like, fuck, I wanted to go to college, but now I have to stay home and take care of this child with my mom. You know, like something along those lines is an example. For some reason, you are being pulled back home to your roots, to your home base, and it needs you. You know, maybe this is like you're needing to move back to your hometown and you don't want to. You know, it could go many different ways. But basically, there's lots of themes of the family martyring themselves back and forth. You martyring yourself to your family martyring yourself to you. This can even be a situation where maybe you bought a house and maybe now you're taking care of the house more. You know, it could be something like that, like you're putting in more renovations, you're putting in a lot more care to the home, and maybe this can be a potential where there's maybe some things that were, you know, bad about the home or wrong about the home that you didn't realize were, and so you're having to put in a lot more like care and affection into the home. This can also be like, I think, a huge transit where you have a child. Because like, oh, I feel like what is a more like physical representation of like Neptune in the 4th house, but a child having to really give yourself over and care for something and stay home more because you have a child, right? I think this is a very, you know, obvious example. But there will be like a loss of boundaries in the family. You know, this can even be a situation where maybe in the Neptune moved in the 3rd house, you moved in a more drug environment, you know, drug infested, I guess I'll say, community, and you got hooked on drugs. Now you're staying home and Neptuning in the 4th house and just being on drugs all the time. Maybe you wind up living with people that are on substances, or, you know, maybe you wind up living with more spiritual people. Maybe you wind up living with more religious people, or religion enters your home for the first time. Maybe your parents remarried when Neptune was going through a 3rd house, and one of your new stepmom is like really religious, and all of a sudden with Neptune transiting your 4th house, religion is in your home for the first time and you've never experienced that before. I think would be a very kind of like obvious example of Neptune transiting your 4th house. You're gonna feel like you want to be home more. You kind of want to be more slouchy at home, be more lazy around the home, be more neglectful of the home. Maybe you aren't cleaning as much as you used to. You aren't as aware of all the dust or the dirt that's going on. Maybe you're just happy to have a home and you're not really paying attention to the grime and the muck of what's around it. Can also be a theme. Definitely a lot of manipulation from the home and the family. And also something that I'm going to say with Neptune moving to the 4th house is, you know, this can put you in a situation where like maybe you were crowd surfing with Neptune in the 3rd house or whatever it is, but you know, this can be like a very down on your luck situation, but just be cautious that you're not overstaying your welcome. You know what I mean? Just be cautious that you're not the one draining somebody else of their resources. You know, while you can be drained of your resources, simultaneously you can then drain somebody else of theirs as well. So just try to be cautious and try to be aware. I think with Neptune in the 4th house, there is an innate sensitivity that comes with transiting Neptune through your 4th house. You're going to be more sensitive, more sensorially aware of what's going on in your home, more aware of the vibes that are going on in your home. Use that if you're picking up on something and you feel like you may be, you know, bleeding someone a little bit dry and you're feeling that, but they're not saying that. You're feeling that for a reason. You have Neptune transiting your 4th house. It's telling you something, you know, and that can also go for like other situations, right? If you're getting a vibe with your mom, but she's not saying anything, with Neptune moving to your 4th house, you're picking up on that for a reason, right? Maybe you live in a home that's like an artistic home. Like, you know, have you ever heard of those? Like, I used to live in LA and there used to be those like homes where like, I used to have so many friends that lived in these, you know, like 10 people to one room and they all live in bunk beds and they're all just like artists trying to make it. It's like an artist home. You know what I mean? Like that is very Neptune in the 4th house kind of vibe. You may feel a little bit of a loss of roots, a dissolution of roots. You know, like maybe once you had a family and with Neptune moving in through the 4th house, you just don't really anymore like you used to. And so you need to kind of create your own eclectic artistic family. You can also be more idealistic when it comes to family members. Maybe you're letting them get away with too much. Maybe you have a sibling that has a drug dependency and you're taking care of them and you're kind of letting yourself be manipulated by them, right? I do think there can be a little bit more of a non-committal attitude to life in general. There's more of this attitude of letting bygones be bygones, and what will be, and what will happen will happen. And if you don't have that kind of attitude, life will force that upon you when Neptune transits through your 4th house. Sorry. Again, you may be feeling more drained easier by the day. You may need to kind of come home and escape and shut down, and you may feel more drained from work. You may feel more drained from relationships. You maybe feel more drained by just having to go out and be yourself, right? Opposite, 10th house square 1st and 7th, so you just may need to kind of come home and recuperate more and lay around more, lounge around more. You may be less assertive in the home than you once were. Again, letting yourself be manipulated and letting yourself manipulate others, so there can be less assertion. Maybe you aren't able to work because of things that are going on in the home that become so demanding. Also, definitely, dreaming about your dream home. And and I will say, if Neptune is well aspected, if Neptune is going over like a very benefic personal planet like Venus or something, this can be something in the positive, that this manifests as somebody that actually gets to live in their dream home or their like dream environment, right? Like this can be somebody that gets to buy their dream home for the first time. You can struggle to keep your emotions in check. You can be a little bit moodier, a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more, easy to hit, right? And so you may just kind of want to stay home more, right? Because of that. Lots of staring off into space and pondering. You escape the world by being at home in your own little world. You may be more introverted than normal or need more time to recharge, can also be themes. I see Neptune moving through the 4th house as a very literal Neptune transit, because it's just Neptune themes at home and your roots and your heart of hearts. Themes of neglect in the home are huge with this transit. You become more artistic, more spiritual, right? But all of this stuff is happening in the bubble of your home. You're not putting it out there. You're not putting it out on social media. You're not forming groups about it. You're not talking about it. This is all a spiritual transformation of the self in the home, in this little bubble, right? That's Neptune in the 4th house. But yeah, so let me know your experiences if you are about to start your Neptune in the 4th house transit, or you have been going through it for a little while. Does this resonate? Do you feel like this might resonate? I would love to know in the comments. Neptune through the 5th house. Wow, am I jealous of you? I will never experience this transit. I just sound like such a Cancer rising when I said that. But honestly, like, to be honest, I do feel like if you have this transit, savor it, because I do think it is something very special with Neptune moving through the 5th house. Anyways, you just had a really shitty Neptune in the 4th house transit. So like, I think you deserve it. I really do think you do. So coming from Neptune in the 4th house, when things were feeling a little bit more bleak, when things were, you're just like, your escapism was escaping, you know what I mean? Now that you've lived this dreamy life full of delusions of grandeur, it's time to create and put those ideas out in the world, right? You've been staying at home, sulking maybe a little bit, maybe drawing, creating, connecting more religiously, spiritually, learning an instrument, whatever it is. When Neptune moves in the 5th house, now that you've been doing all this like spiritual transformation and creation in the bubble, that's what I talked about when I was talking about Neptune transiting the 4th house in the last segment, right? You've been going through this like spiritual transformation in a bubble. With Neptune moving in the 5th house, it's time to pop that bubble and put it out into the world. When Neptune moves in the 5th house, I just think in general, you have this like foggy, like distorted rose-tinted glasses lens on life, and things are like butterflies and rainbows and marshmallows when Neptune goes through your 5th house, right? Like you see things through this like amazing, wonderful, mystical lens. Everybody is prettier when Neptune moves through your 5th house. Everybody's more attractive. Music sounds better, right? The arts are artsing. The creatives are creativing with this energy. Romance is romancing with this energy. Let me tell you. Now that you've been holed up for like a decade or so when Neptune moves through your 4th house, it's time to see the sunshine and start dating and dancing, Now, obviously, all that glitters isn't gold, and there can be a lot of letdowns and disappointments when Neptune moves through your 5th house. You can see all these people as the most beautiful, handsome, amazing, pretty people ever, and it can be, that stark reality when you wake up next to them and they're not as beautiful as they were the night before, right? That can definitely be a big theme with Neptune in the 5th house. It can even be a theme of really dreaming about romance. romance. Watching movies, listening to songs about romance is a huge theme with Neptune transiting your 5th house. But then when romance actually comes, when you actually learn how to play those songs on an instrument, maybe it's not as, you know, wonderful and magical as you thought it was. And that can be a hard thing with Neptune in the 5th house. But for the most part, this is the time to get creative. If you are a creative person, now is the time to get that shit out there. If you draw, paint, sing, dance, act, write, you know, play an instrument, any of those creative things, whatever I'm missing, you know, you have a certain religious belief or spiritual belief, right? With Neptune in the 5th house, it's time to get it out there. It's time to start producing music and putting out your records. It's time to start auditioning and putting those self-tapes out there. You know, and if you aren't doing that stuff, you'll probably want to start. You know, maybe you were never a creative person. With Neptune moving through your 5th house, now you are. That is your identity. That is your self-expression, right? How you once expressed and adorned yourself is probably going to change, and it's probably going to become a lot more, you know, hot, messy, Neptunian, you know, oh, I just threw on this, you know, messy bun and it just happens to be perfect. You know, this like effortless, chic sort of oopsie daisy. I'm just this hot mess with my smudged eyeliner from yesterday, you know, because I partied too late, you know, very Neptune in the 5th house. It's giving Kesha. You may dress more hippie-like or just dress more comfortable. Can also be a theme. Tapestries and tie-dye can be a theme with Neptune moving through your 5th house. You maybe want to be more creative with how you dress, or maybe you'll wear more secondhand clothing can also be a theme with Neptune transiting your 5th house. Also, recreational drug use in a fun way, you know, just kind of going out and maybe partying a little bit or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be, maybe you're just around people that party more or enjoy themselves more, something along those lines. But it's a lot more casual. You know, Neptune in the 4th house can get really dark with their drug use, and it can get really intense, and they can become their drug use, honestly. But with Neptune in the 5th house, it's not like that. It's more of like an image, right? You project this sort of, you know, party girl, Charlie XCX brat sort of image is very like Neptune in the 5th house, right? But that doesn't mean that you actually take that home with you, thankfully. Most of the time. You escape through fun and dating. Like, this is the dating time, right? Everybody looks so attractive to you during this time, so you're gonna wanna date them all, right? And you can be a little bit elusive in dating. You can be hard to pin down because everybody just looks so pretty and attractive, and you see everybody with these like starry eyes and butterflies that it's like, how can I choose just one? So there may be a lot of deceptiveness when it comes to dating, elusiveness, you know, again, hard to pin down sort of energy. This is great if you work in a creative field or you want to. This is highly imaginative. Life is more magical and lovely. You know, it's giving rom-com romance movie. Your romantic life is just rich in wonderment and illusion. You may also martyr yourself to your creative work, so just be cautious. In some ways it can be good if you want to do, again, creative work, because your creative work will have no boundaries. Maybe you once were very nervous about writing about, you know, maybe you're a writer and you write songs, and maybe you were nervous about writing songs about your own personal life. But when Neptune goes in the 5th house, you don't have as many boundaries when it comes to your personal life, you know, and your creative life. They become synonymous and they become one. So this is somebody that writes songs and uses the person that broke their heart's first name as an example. And maybe they even come up with like an alias when Neptune moves through their 5th house as well, and kind of comes up with like a different name. Can also be like a major theme. However, there can be a little bit of a loss of confidence. You can be disillusioned by confidence, or you can be a little bit less assertive. Maybe because with Neptune moving through your 5th house, you get a record label, but then the record label says you have to do this, this, and this with your album, and you can't do this, this, and this. So with Neptune in the 5th house, you martyr yourself to your creative work. You go, okay, if that's what I have to do, then that's what I have to do. Or, okay, if that's what you wanted me to be, record label, then that's what you want me to be, and I'll be that, you know? So there can be this manipulation through creativity for sure. And you can lose yourself to your creative work. Sometimes it can be a good thing and you feel like you really heal yourself through it and it can be very cathartic. But in other ways, You can lose yourself to the expectations of making people happy. I think there's a big theme with the fifth house of wanting everybody to like them and wanting to make everybody happy with their creative work. And so with Neptune in the fifth house, you can lose some of your morals or lose some of yourself in order to become more approachable and in order to become more likable and to make it so everybody likes your creativity. I think is a very Neptune in the fifth house kind of thing. Or at least that like group that you want to like it likes it. You know what I mean? You can pander, maybe a little bit. Yeah, you cannot have a backbone, I think, with this placement. Love is very important, but it also feels very elusive and very hard to hang on to and understand. You know, you might find that you want to be saved. I think with this energy, I want to be saved. Where's my Romeo to my Juliet? You know, gender neutral here. You might also attach yourself to people who want to be saved as well. It's giving very like Amy Winehouse and whatever her boyfriend's name is that like got her into drugs. Like that relationship feels very Neptune in the fifth house, if I'm being honest with you. Also, children can come up in deceptive ways. Like this can also be, I should say, this is also a big placement that I think you'd want to have kids during this time because it's all about unconditional love and creations, and that is kind of like kids, right? You might also have a child that winds up being very deceptive or very creative or very artistic, or a child that lives in their own world. So maybe you're Neptune in the fifth house. If you're not really in the dating scene, this can manifest through a child that takes on all these qualities, right? You can be attracted to people that you want to save or low lives, or honestly, you might be the low life that people want to save. I kind of think it's more like that sometimes. Getting taken advantage of by the people that you love, but also taking advantage of the people that you love, I think is big with this placement. Pouring your soul into creative projects. Oh yeah. Soul connections, right? How did I not say this first off? This is my soulmate. This is my karmic situationship. You know, this is my soul tie, right? All those kinds of whatever elusive themes of like, you know, I can't think of any more that we say, you know, soulmates, past life connections, all those things. Oh, that's going to come up with Neptune in the fifth house. Oh, that is going to come up in many, 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 many ways. Always, always it's going to come up, right? Losing oneself to the creativity or their role and having a psychotic break. But I will say that that psychotic break will probably be slightly performative. You know, doing it for the art, you know, really. Falling for people that nobody else would see anything in. And maybe people fall for you that nobody else would see anything in, that you see nothing in. Maybe people keep falling for you and you feel worthless and you feel like, oh my gosh, what do you see in me, right? Like it can be like the person that manic pixie dream girls other people. Neptune in the sixth house. So this is coming from your fifth house. So this means that your starry-eyed illusions are basically fading away. When Neptune goes into your sixth house, it's just a harsh reality check, I think, because not because Neptune moves in your sixth house, but because Neptune moves out of your fifth house. And that foggy, dreamy lens that you once had on life and people and relationships and love and creativity and artistry is now gone. Now gone. You know, what goes up must come down, and the harsh realities of life are beginning to weigh way heavier on you than before. You're starting to notice people's flaws in a way that you did not previously. Your artistic tendencies and your recreational drug use is becoming a lot less recreational than you once thought it was, and that Great Gatsby lifestyle that you thought was just a projection is becoming a reality. It's like that part in, what's that movie, Boogie Nights, when they have that coke scene and they're kind of becoming cokeheads and it's becoming less glamorized and they kind of start like panicking. That to me is like the feeling of Neptune moving into your sixth house. I'm not saying it's exactly that experience, like you're going to be going through that exact thing. I'm not saying everybody that goes through Neptune in the fifth house does coke, because that's just wrong. But it's that feeling of when the sun starts to rise on the night of you doing coke, and the harsh reality and the maybe even suicidal thoughts start to creep in is kind of how I see this energy. Fantasies become less magical and more mundane. You may start being on drugs daily instead of recreationally or in a fun way. You may even start medication or therapy. You may start realizing that what you once thought was just a cute, you know, I'm just Cassie from Skins, you know, is actually like a mental illness and a problem. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like this isn't cute anymore. is kind of the thought. You need to start taking on a more holistic approach to health and wellness, okay? You do not. And Neptune in the 5th house, you ate sugar, right? And it's now coming and raining down on you. This can be an energy where maybe you're getting older. Maybe you're hitting age 30, right? And your Neptune goes into your 6th house and you're starting to feel your body, feel your health a little bit more, right? Because Neptune is very intuitive. So we start feeling the inner workings of our body a little bit more. Our body starts becoming a lot more susceptible and sensitive to the food that we put in it, the way that we treat our bodies, the way we treat our health. This is a situation where maybe in the past you were just taking medication and now that medication is catching up on you and you need to start like actually healing yourself from the inside out. Maybe you start going to a nutritionist. Maybe you start seeing an astrologer. Maybe you start seeing a therapist. Maybe you start, kind of becoming more spiritually inclined, but from a more holistic health perspective. Maybe you go vegan, maybe you go vegetarian, maybe you go keto, unfortunately. Your daily routine winds up feeling like it's too demanding. It's too highly demanding and it's just too much. You get tired easier. You get exhausted from daily things. You are not able to get as much done in a day anymore than you once were able to. You need to rest more. You need to relax more. This is honestly a transit that's very easy to succumb to if you do not have a strong Mars, Saturn, and or Pluto. Honestly, especially Saturn and Mars more than anything. If you do not have a strong one of those, it's very easy to succumb to because you'll just go, okay, then I'll just smoke weed every day. Okay, then I'll just sleep in until, 5 p.m. Okay, then I'll just miss work. This can be a placement that is extremely neglectful of their daily routine, of their daily activities, of their day-to-day life and their schedule. This is somebody that really all of a sudden cannot keep a schedule, does not know what day it is, does not know where anything is, does not clean their house, right? It's a very neglectful placement in a very mundane way. So if you do not have a strong Mars that's able to get you up and get you going, or maybe like fire energy, if you do not have a strong Saturn or strong Earth energy to be able to keep up that consistency and that discipline, this is an energy that can be really, really hard and I think can take over your life because the 6th house is your daily routine and is your daily life. So this Neptunian fogginess and haziness and laziness can really take on. Now, in a way, this can translate positively if you're wanting to manifest this energy well. Again, holistic health, new age spiritual ways of healing can be something that becomes a great interest to you. That can be very positive, as well as having a job that's a little bit more healing, right? Having a job where you heal people, you help people, you aid people spiritually. It's maybe a job that, has your religious or spiritual views more inclined. Just with this energy in general, the mundane becomes harder to rationalize, okay? And so because of this, what can really help ground you are daily spiritual or Richie practices, and you can become more in tune with that stuff. Your daily tarot draws and the journaling you do may become a real outlet and a way for you to escape, right? So instead of escaping through, maybe substances, escaping through yoga, escaping through a daily tarot draw, escaping through prayer, escaping through healing and helping others, being a therapist, going to therapy, things of that nature. Holistic health is how this is summarized. You may eat trash and garbage that you should not, but this is going to catch up with you during this transit. The way you treat your body and your sleep schedule is going to catch up with you. Also, I think there's escape through through habits and ritual. Oh, I escape through life by going and get my soda, by smoking weed, by doing my meditation, right? Those are the ways that you escape. By sleeping, I think is probably the biggest one. You may be more confused about what you want to do for your job. You may not have as regimented of a daily routine or schedule as everybody else. You may be unsure as far as where you want to take your career as well moving forward. You may also be expected to take on spirituality in a more Virgoan way. So maybe if you're younger, maybe your parents become very religious and they start making you go to church every day and pray every day before you eat and before you go to bed. So where spirituality becomes this more ardent scheduled thing than just this more all-encompassing relaxed sort of energy, right? This is also all about compassionate service and helping others, giving yourself over to others in solitude. You can also feel very obligated towards others. You can give too much of your energy to others that you can feel too depleted to do things for yourself. You can get really drained and exhausted. This can be somebody that can be like a stay-at-home mom with children that are very demanding. Maybe they're very, very young, and you really just give yourself over to them for much of your life. You may need more help or support in your day-to-day life, or you just may neglect your day-to-day life and your schedule and routines. Maybe you daydream about getting a better job without going out and actually doing it. But this is the time to manifest whatever you want for your daily routine and your life, okay? However you want your routine to look, that's what you have the power to manifest, right? This is a very potent energy as far as that way. If you want your health to be good, then you need to have that kind of healthy mindset, right? You can be a little bit more flakier on commitments, flaking through on plans. Being a little bit more unreliable can be another big theme. You need to be cautious of being taken advantage of on the job, or having a job that really drains your spiritual energy. You can have a lower guard when it comes to your coworkers, and so be cautious because you can be easily manipulated by your coworkers or be manipulated into doing more work than you need to be doing because of this. I don't know if I would trust like typical medicine, doctors, or pills or things of that nature. I think that with this transit, it needs to be more alternative. You need to heal things emotionally and spiritually. If you're going through a major health issue during this time, there is a major emotional or spiritual thing that you need to go through to be able to cure it or solve it, right? You go through spiritual transformations that show up through the way of health, right? Because I got this illness, I went through this miraculous spiritual transformation and found myself. And, you know, those kinds of things are very much themes of Neptune in the 6th house. So yes, if you've recently gone through Neptune in the 6th house, or if you're about to go through it, if you're currently going through it, please let me know how your experience was in the comments. I would love to know. All right, here we are with Neptune hitting another angle. So this is a big, big deal with Neptune transiting your 7th house. Okay, so whenever Neptune goes from your 6th house to your 7th house, I do think you will go through some sort of spiritual transformation, probably more in the way that you view others, whereas, you know, 12th to 1st was about how you view yourself. 6th to 7th is going to transform how you see other people, how you interact with other people, right? It may even for some reason have to do with it, you know, coming from your 6th house. Maybe you have this new holistic way of treating yourself or healing others or serving others, right? And maybe after this experience, whatever you've learned, kind of I see it as, right? 6th house, whatever you've learned about Neptune through your 6th house, this now makes it so that you kind of see people differently, treat people differently, right? And whatever that viewpoint is yours alone, right? That's your individualistic thing, right? But it'll change, right? Is the transit what it's indicating. So again, coming from the 6th house, I do think that from the 6th house, you had this really more dull, you know, Neptune transit where there wasn't much, you know, shiny, bright Neptunian things, you know. With it going into the 7th house, you will have more of a Neptunian sort of lens on life, right? That's just kind of, you know, what goes up will come down, what goes down will come up. So with this transit, it's kind of going up, right? You kind of have a filter on the way that you see people with Neptune moving through your 7th house. You have a little bit of a rose-tinted glasses look towards other people. I think that a way that this can really translate is if you were to have a child, right? I think this can have a lot to do with like Neptune going from your 3rd and 4th, as well as Neptune going from your 6th and your 7th. I think these can be both indicators of having a kid. Now, obviously a big one will be like being in a relationship, which we'll get into all of that stuff later on, but right, like it would make sense if while your Neptune was in your 6th house, you had this very spiritual experience of having a child, right? And your body went through a huge transformation, right? And then when your Neptune is in your 7th house, you now have this child you see through this very Neptunian lens. So I actually think this is a beautiful way that this transit can translate, because now that you have this child, right, you're like, this is a perfect child, which is, I think, a good way to see your kid. That's how I think you should see your kid with a little bit of that Neptunian lens on them, right? You want that kind of unconditional love feeling with your child. But anyways, okay, so coming from your 6th house, you probably lost a lot of structure after Neptune transited your 6th house. You've kind of given yourself over to your routine, and so now it's time to give yourself over to someone else. Now that you have have these like coworker relationships without these boundaries. It's time to actually develop maybe those relationships, right? You have these workplace relationships potentially with Neptune in the 6th house that you've gotten very close to these people you work with. Now maybe you're developing these more interpersonal relationships, one-on-one connections with them. It could even be something, I feel like people obviously really focus on the relationship aspect of the 7th house. I'm starting to believe the 5th house is more about romantic relationships, and the 7th house is truly more about connections to the other and interpersonal relationships of all kinds. And romance is just one piece of the puzzle, because I think of Neptune in the 6th house, somebody who went through this very holistic, transformation health-wise. Now maybe they're like, I need to preach what I believe and what I found and how I have healed myself. And so I am going to create this business where I do consultations, very 7th house consultations, one-on-one, with very diplomatic as well, 7th house with people. And so now I'm going to, I've created this business, and so now I am developing these one-on-one relationships with my clients, right? Maybe you start to have the same few clients that you start to treat, you see them once a month, and you develop this very like Neptunian healing relationship with them because of the wisdom that you've gained from your Neptune in the 6th house transit. I think it's another example in a way that this can translate. You start to be more disillusioned by people. You thought you knew people, maybe. But I mean, obviously, okay, if you have an empty 7th house or whatever, like, let's just say you thought you knew people before Neptune entered your 7th house. And now that Neptune is entering your 7th house, you're realizing that people aren't who you thought that they were. People as a whole, right? That the people that you knew, your friends, family, co-workers, bosses, just everybody, people, others are not what they thought you were, and you don't understand them as much as you once did. They're not as clear to you. They don't make as much sense to you. You're starting to be disillusioned by them. This is a transit that is very susceptible to being manipulated by people, being used by people, right? There can be major themes of back and forth codependency with Neptune transiting your 7th house. That is kind of why I said towards the beginning of this explanation that I think that having a child is a very beautiful way that this can translate, because of course, of course that kid is dependent on you, and of course there's themes of codependency with you and your child. I would hope so, you can really give yourself over to people, maybe it's a situation where you really lose yourself to somebody else as well. You can really feel like you don't know who you are because you don't understand others. Does that make sense? You do not know where you stand with others. You do not know where you fit with others. So because of that, you do not understand you, I think is a very Neptune in the 7th house transit feeling, where you thought you once did, right? People are going to start projecting a lot of things onto you, and you are going to start projecting and assuming a lot of things of others, okay? The projections are going to go back and forth, and it's going to get lost, basically. Who is projecting onto what? Am I projecting onto you? Are you projecting onto me? We do not know, okay? There will be a lot of more people with those Neptunian traits coming up. You are going to be a person that starts assigning Neptune to other people. Oh, everybody else is so spiritual. Everybody else is very empathetic. Everybody else is lazy. Everybody else is very religious. Everybody else is very delusional. Everybody else is very, all those Neptunian kind of words in their own world. Everybody else is in their own fantasies, but you go, but me, but I am not. Okay, that is all you guys, right? And you project that onto the other person. And that's kind of all what the 7th house is about. It's about the shadow, right? So the shadow becomes this Neptunian thing for you while you're experiencing this Neptune transit. Neptune lives in your shadow. So this may be a time where you do shadow work more to connect with your spirituality. I do think that the 7th house is literally your shadow, right? And so it has a lot to do with that shadow work, that other darker side of ourself than we realize. So we can start experiencing a more shadow side of Neptune. So a little bit more of that darker side of Neptune. You start to see people when they're down bad, when they're really struggling. You tend to meet people at times of spiritual crisis, right? I said towards the beginning of this explanation that this is common with like clients, right? Like if you're doing spiritual client stuff, right? Like health, wellness, Neptune, consultations, therapy, you know, anything along those lines, astrology, right? Like I have this placement natally, so it makes sense that I'm meeting people in these times of spiritual crisis. For me, you know, my Neptune is well aspected. This is not a negative thing. I welcome that energy. I'm very comfortable with that energy because I have it natally, right? So, you know, I'm very used to it. So it doesn't always have to be a bad thing that you're meeting people in these times, right? If it's able to be, you know, well aspected, or you're able to construct it well and use the energy well. But sometimes it can be just, it can feel like everybody that you meet is kind of at a time of spiritual crisis during this time. And so because of that, you wind up projecting that everybody else, you know, has these Neptunian issues and everybody else is super lost and aimless and doesn't know what they're doing and delusional and confused, but you're not. It's just everybody else that you interact with. But let's be honest, this is why it's your shadow, right? People are coming to you for this stuff for a reason, right? People are seeing you do this stuff for a reason because you have that energy innately in you as well, right? That's why I said themes of codependence, but the line is blurred, right? It's not clear. Are they taking care of me or am I taking care of them? You know what I mean? Who's really giving themselves over? I had to be honest. I had to take a second, you guys. I've been filming for a while. It's late, okay? This doesn't matter, but I had a whole Mercury retrograde issue today. I was ready to film pretty early, but then we had this plumbing issue and you know, you can't film when there's loud noise. So it got me off to a delayed start, very Mercury retrograde, but it's okay. The lighting is bad and it's going to get worse, just so you know, from this point on, and it's already been bad. And yeah, this is a very long video. But yeah, basically you start idealizing people. You start putting them on a pedestal. And you know, the higher that you put people on a pedestal, the farther there is to fall. And inevitably they will fall because everybody is truly just human. And with Neptune in the 7th house, it can be hard for you to see people's character flaws and see people's faults because you can have this very disillusioned, rose-tinted glasses view of them. And so it can just be so hard to see people clearly. That's why I think during this transit, I think it would be very common for somebody to pick up something like psychology or some form of spirituality like astrology or human design or, you know, some kind of like personality type of thing, because there can be this real confusion over who are you, and so who am I, because I don't know you, so how do I know me, and I don't know how you see me, so how do you, you know, all that sort of stuff, you know, identity crises, in that sort of fashion is very Neptune in the 7th house. Yeah, the sun is setting and I'm literally halfway through this video, so that's good news. Definitely lots of back and forth manic pixie dream girling. Are they manic pixie dream girling me? Am I manic pixie dream girling myself? Am I manic pixie dream girling them? You know, the line is very much blurred. The Neptune moving through the 7th house is the definition of just the line being blurred, just in general, right? Because Libra is very like this or that. And so it's like that or this or that, or maybe this or what about that? You know, people can project a lot of the qualities that they don't like about themselves onto you and assume a lot of things about you. And so you'll probably have to deal with a lot of misplaced assumptions, and it'll be very hard for you to decipher whether or not those assumptions are true or not. Lots of like taking care of somebody else, always, you know, finding somebody that needs to be saved, you know, attracting people that need to be saved, you know, being like that really toxic, like white knight energy can also be a very kind of negative, you know, expression of this transit. And it makes sense, like if you just went through this Neptune in the 6th house transit where you just like saved yourself from this like holistic health thing, you know, and then you're gonna want to like save everybody else from it too. So it makes sense, right? There's also a lot of martyrdom ship. Just the definition of martyrdom ship is very Neptune in the 7th house. This may be a time, again, in a good way. Like I said, you may have a child. You may also get married, have a grandchild. This can be a good energy to get a dog, you know, or an animal. Speaking of, come here. I think that if you're worried about like this transit, you know, find a good outlet for that Neptune in the 7th house energy, that kind of unconditional love, right? Like a dog or a cat or a pet, you know what I mean? If you're not in a relationship or you don't have a kid, I think you do need an outlet for that sort of like love and empathy that you'll kind of want to give during this time, and that like caretaking. You can easily save people that don't want to be saved or don't need to be saved, you know? Oh, there she is. Hi, Pixie. You may also be very attracted to Neptunian people, right? So you may get into relationships and idealize relationships and idealize partners, right? Put them on a pedestal, not see your relationships clearly. You can be very easily manipulated by people, especially the people that are closest to you, right? Especially people in a relationship with you, or just those really close friendships or whatever it may be. You know what I mean? There can be a lot of feeling like you're being manipulated, or are you manipulating, or are they manipulating? There can be a lot of projection, right? It's very, yeah, right? Neptune. Okay. You can see your partner as behaving irresponsibly, or behaving foolishly, or making goofy mistakes, or being lazier. Maybe you'll attract a partner that's a little bit more artsy or artistic. It's very much that sort of like being in love with the busker on the street sort of energy is very much Neptune in the 7th house. Being in love with like kind of like a, you know, person living in their parents' basement, right? You know, being in love with like just a burnout is very, you know, Neptune in the 7th house. Being friends with those kind of people, being around those kinds of communities, attracting those kinds of people, feeling the most comfortable with those kinds of people, all that kind of stuff. But you will probably feel like you do not display those energies. It is simply the people around you. So that's the shadow work that you have to do, because you're attracting these people for a reason, and you need to find out what that reason is, because that's, I'm such a Capricorn. That's the Neptune lesson. Neptune doesn't have lessons. Okay, whatever. You can disregard that. This is also very much like bleeding heart syndrome. Becoming more accepting of people and their flaws, especially overlooking people's flaws, and becoming the therapist friend is very much all themes. I could go on forever. But yes, that is Neptune transiting the 7th house. I could go on forever, but if you have recently been through this transit, or you are going through this transit, let me know if this resonates or what your experience is down below. I'd be so curious to know. Wow, what am I, Dr. Seuss? How embarrassing. Okay, moving on. Neptune transiting the 8th house. This is a hard one. I do to fully believe, actually, it is by experience. I think it is a hard one, actually, because this was a transit that I went to when I was a very young child. I have Neptune in the 7th house natally, but basically, okay, coming from the 7th house, you probably attached to a relationship that you see as very dreamy and perfect, right? Nothing can shatter this perfect bubble. Maybe you even got married. Maybe you have a child. Maybe you took care of a parent, you know, something along those lines. Well, now it's time for that relationship to get serious and go through those tests, right? I think 8th house puts things through a lot of tests, right? And see if you'll still come out together, or if Neptune was really just eluding you, right? This could be a friendship, a partnership of any kind, right? This is a real, going from having what you thought was a really close connection to people to now realizing, you know, like when you go through those really intense experiences, right? And you realize that that makes or breaks a relationship. That's kind of like the theme of like Neptune going through the 8th house, coming from the 7th house, you know, having that partnership. Now it's going through those tests. And some other themes of Neptune in the 8th house, you know, when I was a child going through this transit, I particularly remember being afraid of everything. And I think as a child, you are naturally just afraid of things. So I think that's a piece of the puzzle. But I particularly felt as though only during the years of my Neptune in the 8th house transit was I afraid of everything. The second that Neptune got out of that transit, I wasn't anymore. And I had a much more like lighthearted, like, oh, like, why did I take that stuff? Like, why was I so scared? Why, you know what I mean? Like, I just was like overnight, it just kind of like went away. So I do think that no matter the age that you experience this transit, I wonder if there really is an undertone of things feeling a little bit more scary, like things feeling a little darker, things feeling a little bit more disturbing. You know what I mean? This is, I think, a very scary transit. Not trying to scare you guys, but the eighth house is a scary place. It can really be a total dissolution of boundaries with another person, especially. You may have a really, really dark mind or like inner self during this time. Your mind can go to very dark places, and maybe you might struggle to go to sleep or have really bad nightmares, have horrible, really scary prophetic nightmares, have dreams or have experiences that you weren't sure if what you experienced was real or fake. And that's what can be so deeply disturbing about this transit. I think it's easier for me to rationalize this transit as I was a child, but I had so many experiences as a kid that I still don't know if it was real or fake, if I was dreaming that, or I look back and I'm like, that couldn't have been a real thing that happened. Like, I must have just been a little kid that was dreaming things up. Like, I remember having real vivid experiences of these dolls at my friend's, grandparents' house coming alive at night and like talking to me. But I also was just a kid that had a very vivid imagination, and I did have a lot of very intense dreams as a child, which I think you will also be experiencing with this transit Neptune in the 8th house, right? So it's that whole line of like, but it was so real, but it must have been a dream, right? So I think there can be a lot of those kinds of things, right? And the relationship that you thought was boundaryless when Neptune was going through your 7th house, you realize that it wasn't, and there were still more boundaries to get down. This is kind of saying, are you willing to be vulnerable? How vulnerable are you willing to go? How deep are you really willing to go? Also, this was something else that I wanted to just kind of like say as like an anecdote. When I was a kid, as I mentioned, I was raised Jewish, and actually during the years that my Neptune was going through my 8th house was the only time that I was going through Hebrew school. I went through Hebrew school for about 10 years, which makes sense because my 8th house is like contained within Aquarius. But anyways, it's basically my exact Neptune in the 8th house transit. And right when I got bat mitzvahed at 13 was the exact time when my Neptune went from my 8th house to my 9th house, and I didn't have to go to Hebrew school anymore. And I was so glad. Because it was very Neptune in the 8th house. It just felt so like, I feel like very, very much religion is a very Neptune in the 8th house experience, especially religion that feels like it has a lot of rules, and it has a lot of like shame and guilt around it is a very like 8th house sort of energy, regret, is very like 8th housey energy. I think Neptune in the 8th house, you can be exposed to a lot of really dark, intense things during this time, and you can feel like you're waking up to the darkness of life, basically, is this transit. But I always found it was very interesting that right as I got bat mitzvahed and, I didn't have to, I finally got religious freedom, which we'll go into that later. When I didn't have religious freedom was Neptune in the 8th house. I had to go to Hebrew school no matter what. I had to go 3 days a week. I had to go to synagogue. I had to celebrate all the holidays. We had to do all the stuff. I had to get the bat mitzvah, right? And then finally when I didn't have to go anymore and I just had to go to like synagogue and celebrate the holidays, and it was more of like a fun thing, and more of like a cultural thing for me instead of like a confining, like suffocating thing, was when it went into my 9th house. So that may be your religious experience when your Neptune's going through your 8th house. You might do this onto yourself as well. You might have a really strict, rule-based, scary, like if Catholicism, I feel like if Catholicism had a birth chart, it would have to have Neptune in the 8th house. And you know what I mean? Any themes of Catholicism feels very Neptune in the 8th house, even like really dark themes like molestation and prostitution and giving up your body for drugs, just like really, getting to the bottom of the bottom a lot of times. And again, there's still a mystery around that. Like, did that even really happen? Like, I was on drugs. Did that even happen, right? Like, I don't even know. Like, there can also be some weird ancestral stuff that comes in with this. Like, there can be weird themes of, mental illnesses that you inherit, mental health struggles that you inherit, psychological stuff that you inherit. This is a pretty dark energy, but it doesn't always feel dark because there's this very mystical lens that makes you allude to it being wonderful and fantastical still, even though it's probably causing a lot of trauma, damage, and destruction upon your life. You know, it's definitely a very like romanticization aspect of like, it's giving like Lana Del Rey kind of stuff. You know what I'm trying to say? Which she's an 8th house sun, so it makes sense. I do think also this is an energy where you become completely dependent on another person. You might even become completely dependent on another person's money, which makes sense, right? When I was going through this transit, I was like ages like 3 to 13 or something. So, you know, I couldn't have a job. So I was completely dependent on my parents' financial situation. So that makes sense, right? Sometimes things that seem very literal are really just a transit, strangely enough. You know, you may encounter some elusive and challenges when it comes to property or finances. So definitely be cautious if you're getting married during this transit. No matter what financial state you're in, get a prenup. Also be careful of scams or getting swindled out of money. You may also become the scammer, and you may also swindle others out of their money as well, potentially because you have no other way to make ends meet. Yeah, this transit drags you to rock bottom and back, I kind of think. The partner that you took on during your 7th house Neptune transit can fall back on you during this transit. Like, their debt can become your debt. Their inheritances can also become your inheritances. Like, you know what I mean? That's where like the boundaries are very thin, right? Be wary of elusive court cases and read all documents thoroughly, and trust your gut if something seems off or is wrong. This is a deeply spiritually transformative transit. So this is definitely not for the faint of heart. Everything that you thought should be private is now not. Where there should be boundaries, there are now no longer any. The more that I talk about this transit, the more I'm understanding why Michael Jackson has this natally. Okay, speaking of strong sexual fantasies and desires, okay? Very, very intense sexual fantasies. Intense sexual projections as well, right? You may not know, do I want this? Or is somebody projecting this onto me and making me think that I want this, right? Oh, I guess I have to give myself over to this other person completely, so I guess I must do this. I give this to you, I give myself over to you, so you must give yourself over to me completely. We share finances, we share everything, so we must share our bodies as well. There can be a real sacrificial martyrdom theme to the bedroom as well, and it can be in a way that you don't understand or in a way that you don't want. This can be, it can be susceptible to grooming, I'll be honest. And I honestly think that while you're going through this transit, people can smell it, you know what I mean, and target you. So just please be extra careful. This is also very much like somebody that's very susceptible to energy vampires during this. Also be wary of the IRS. But, okay, so in good ways, there can be like deep, boundless intimacy. Like you can really feel like you have somebody in your life that really understands you and really knows you, and you have this really amazing connection, you know. And sometimes this can, I think, also be very platonic. Like I said, I went through this when I was a little kid, and I think I had a really like deep spiritual connection with my mom, as many of you guys know, right? You know, it can just be this real like feeling like you're meant to be with somebody kind of energy, this sort of soulmate, real like not just like that 5th house shallow soulmate kitschy pick a card reading soulmate energy, but this real like, no, this is my soul person, you know, sort of energy. That's a better word. Instead of soulmate, this is like my soul person. Like, but sometimes you can be disillusioned and you can think that sometimes somebody that you meet is your soul person and they're not. So it's a tricky transit. It truly, truly is. Oh, also this is like insanely psychic energy. Like your psychic levels, your gut intuitions, you can read people like nobody's business. Like there is a deep inner knowing to you while you're going through this transit that really, you know, this can be like a superpower. So listen to it, don't ignore it. But yes, if you've experienced this transit, or you are currently experiencing this transit, or you're about to, let me know if this resonated. Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to know down below. But yes, so let's move on to Neptune transiting the 9th house. So coming from the 8th house, this is a really dark transit where you feel like, it almost feels like Neptune gets stuck into this like black hole sort of energy, right? It can be a very scary, very elusive and all-consuming. You can feel like you woke up from a bad dream, because you kind of did. You know, I mentioned that I had Neptune transiting my 8th house when I was young. I literally just got out of this Neptune transit. I'm pretty sure like what is it, earlier last year or something. I've had Neptune going through my 9th house since I was about 13 or 14. And let me tell you, it was a hell of a lot lighter than Neptune in the 8th house, right? I was just not scared of much, you know, when Neptune went through my 9th house, whereas I was a very fearful person when Neptune was going through my 8th house. I started kind of adopting a little bit more of a carefree attitude in a way that I just did not have as a child, right? So coming from the 8th house, you just went through this intense spiritual transformation, and now it's time for things to get a little bit more lighthearted and a little less scary. Also, I mentioned this in the previous one, but you know, when my Neptune transited from my 8th house to my 9th house, right as it crossed over and kind of like retrograded back, but you know what I'm saying, was right when I got bat mitzvahed. Right, was I got bat mitzvahed, I did not have to go to Hebrew school anymore. That was kind of like the deal. I still had to go to synagogue a lot of times and celebrate every holiday, but I did not have to go to Hebrew school 3 times a week. I did not have that extra load of homework. I did not have that extra load of pressure, and that was fantastic, amazing news, and I felt free spiritually for the first time. So this is definitely a sort of breaking free from the chains that bound you religiously and spiritually. Now, mine wasn't that dramatic. I was young, but you know, yours might be a lot more dramatic, especially the older you are when you experience this transit, in my opinion. You know, also very Neptune in the 9th house, I still got to experience my religion through culture casually, and still having friends from Hebrew school, and you know, still, you know, celebrating the holidays with my family, and still speaking Hebrew when I celebrate, you know, when I would celebrate the holidays. So it was still in my life culturally, right? But it was not in my life in this sort of 8th house, you know, cage-like way where it felt like it was an obligation. And now it felt like something that I actually would enjoy and look forward to, right? And I started, and you know, Neptune in the 9th house is kind of all about that, right? Finding joy in spirituality, right? Finding freedom through your spirituality and through your spiritual beliefs. I'll be honest, I think this is an amazing transit. I have absolutely adored this transit, and it gave me, in my opinion, the best gift I've received, which is astrology into my life. And I am so thankful. Also, religion may be an obligation only for like your in-laws or your extended family. Or basically, it's time to run away from the muck and the excess martyrdom you racked up with the previous 3 houses your Neptune has been in if you're that age. Right, Neptune moving through your 6th, 7th, and 8th, you've racked up a lot of like spiritual muck when it comes to like your relationships to other people. So now it's kind of time to run away from that. This is kind of coming into your own kind of spiritual consciousness, but less through a religious standpoint and more from a belief system, right? Like Sagittarian standpoint, okay? This is a much more optimistic placement. And during this transit, right, like during Neptune in the 8th house, you were trying to control everything spiritually. And now during Neptune in the 9th house, you've let go of that and you're trying to adopt a little bit more of a what will be, will be. Let's let bygones be bygones sort of energy. Definitely like lots of spiritual thinking, right? Lots of like pondering and learning, studying about history, studying about cultures, probably being a lot more liberal during this time would be my guess. Even if you're not a liberal person, whatever liberal version of you is. Does that make sense? Okay, escaping and running away from your problems, sure, but running towards understanding and acceptance. Hopefully. Lots of spiritual philosophies and philosophizing, very into like sociology, philosophy, all that kind of stuff. This is also a big energy that is interested in learning about very spiritual religious topics from a very like non-biased, non-emotional perspective though. From a very like Sagittarius lighthearted perspective. Trying a lot of spiritualities, learning about them, absorbing them, and putting them into your practice. Your staunch political views may evaporate, but you may realize the connectedness of everyone and everything, which makes sense, right? It's definitely an increased passion. Can also be a white knight energy. It's kind of like Neptune transiting the 5th house wants to be saved, and Neptune transiting the 9th house is going to be the one to save you, is I think kind of the thought. Searching for soul companions, people that will follow you on your journey or life, hippies and eclectic ideas and people, you know, very counterculture-y. You know, it's giving van life, which makes sense. I did live in a van, or an RV, I should say, for about 1.5 years during this transit. Also, I moved so much during this transit. I was much more unstable than I definitely was during my Neptune in the 8th house. Surprisingly, I was a lot more stable in life with Neptune in the 8th house than Neptune in the 9th house, but I kind of welcomed it with open arms. I also should say that while Neptune was transiting my 9th house, it was very well aspected. So that might be a huge bias for me. You might also do a lot of traveling even for spiritual reasons as well. I never really had a stable home. I was always moving every few years. That is going to be a common theme. It's much more of like a wanderlust kind of lifestyle. Like if you're not somebody that's ready to adapt to that, this can be very hard for you. This can definitely give you a lot more instability and can definitely give you a lot more of a shakier mind. So if you're somebody with the black and white thinking, this is going to be absolutely horrible for you, because it will actually, it could be great for you because it will break that, but it will be really hard for you because it will break that black and white thinking that you once had. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Once I thought in a very black and white way, everything happens for no reason, but now I think in a very like colorful, you know, bright artistic way, everything happens for no reason. Like, you know, it's a very good, you know, positive thing. The staunch religious views and views about life that you have just once found and hung onto and clung onto for dear life while Neptune was in your 8th house, you are now being forced to completely lose, to completely question. They're going to be completely broken, right? There can also be this very elusive feeling of like, there can be a lot of themes of like running away, or like people not being around, or people dissolving, or you know what I mean? There can be this kind of elusive just undertone where people kind of slip through your fingers, you know, and opportunities even can sometimes do that as well, because things feel so elusive. You can't quite, you know, grab it and take it, if that makes sense. Oh, also I said I was always searching for something like during this transit. I was never satisfied with where I lived, but nothing offered me what I wanted, which was everything. That is a very honest way to put it, Shaina, which is very true. I just kind of live where I wind up. That was very Neptune in the 9th house. Like whoever would take me was very much like a Neptune in the 9th house thing. Like landlords, whichever one of you is going to take me is where I'm going to wind up, you know? Living in a more Neptunian town or environment, right? Where did I live during this transit? I lived in LA. I lived in Las Vegas, right? 2 major cities, very Neptune, very glamorous, very like people are like, oh, Vegas, oh, Los Angeles, you know, all those kinds of themes. And then I also lived in like a tiny secluded mountain town in the desert and in the middle of nowhere. Like, and it was those two very extremes, from the most city to the most rural, right? And it's very Neptune, right? Neptune, because it was neglected. It was a little old. It was a little run down. It was kind of isolated. It was secluded. It was around nature. You know, the views were breathtaking. I had the mountains in the backyard. That's very Neptune in the 9th house, you know. I see beautiful sunrises and sunsets every day where I live now, right? Breathtaking landscapes is very Neptune in the 9th house, you know. Even like, again, wanting to run away. I did that a lot. It's giving hermit card at times, not so much with the loneliness, but definitely with the contemplation. Sometimes it can be a feeling of loneliness, like no matter where you run, no matter what, you don't know where you are and you don't know how to be found, right? Maybe you feel like you're always trying to be found for some reason. Okay, you may go to college or study something artistic, right? I went to an arts high school, I went to an acting college, and then I became an astrologer. That's so just like by the book, Neptune in the 9th house. May struggle with small details and only look at the big picture. Slightly more impressionable and optimistic, very open-minded, very willing to hear everyone out, but you may be so open-minded that there are a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas that you don't have to filter, that they kind of seep through, right? So this can be somebody that adopts, you know, gets involved in like a cult-like mindset, or gets involved in a religious cult or a spiritual cult that praises some kind of false god or deity, right? That can be a very commonplace with Neptune in the 9th house. Sees all religions and belief system as connected and one, right? That's going to be a big lesson that you learn as Neptune goes through your 9th house, that it's just about these overarching concepts, myths, ideals, and like personifications, or the different cultures, kind of like representation or version of that idea, right? That's all, and that's kind of, I think, a very Neptune in the 9th house kind of idea. Troubles with school, if you are learning something mundane, constantly taking in as much Neptunian type of content or learning or information as possible, which if you're in, like I have a sun conjunct Neptune, so I loved it. It felt like I found myself, right? But you have to look to your chart, see if this can be something where you feel like you really lose all sense of stability and all sense of self to it, right? Because you feel so lost and so aimless, right? If you don't have a Pisces midheaven like I do, that feeling of being aimless and lost and not having something stable can be very disorientating and very hard to grapple with. But sometimes it can be the most freeing feeling as well. Aimless traveling makes sense. I did so many trips and I slept in my car so many times, you know, not having a place to stay when I travel, or plans falling through, you know, van life, wanderlust sort of travel, camping, you know, things of that nature. I did a lot of that during this Neptune in the 9th house transit. Very like Neptunian style traveling, like, you know, almost like one acid trip away from being in a van going to Grateful Dead, basically, right? Oh, drugs, yeah. Spiritual, doing drugs for spiritual reasons. That would make a lot of sense with Neptune going through the 9th house as well. So yes, you can let me know your experiences with Neptune going through your 9th house. If you just went through this transit, if you're about to go through it, did what I say resonated? Does it seem like this is going to be the themes coming up? What are your thoughts on this transit? I'd love to know down below. Okay, moving on to Neptune transiting the 10th house. So Neptune just came from your 9th house. So basically you now just had this spiritual, religious, artistic, creative awakening. Maybe one of them, maybe all of them. So now it is time to put it out in the world and make a career out of it, or at least make a public image or public persona out of it, right? Now that you've spent the last 14-ish, depending on how big your house is, years wandering through life, it's time to try to put down some roots with this stuff that you just kind of compiled, right? Making your beliefs your public image, creating a legacy because of the things that you learned in the 9th house. Right? And again, because this is hitting an angular house, this, you know, transformation from the 9th to the 10th, this crossover is again going to be like another little bit of like a spiritual awakening or a spiritual realization, or, you know, some kind of big shift or transformation. You know, now that, you know, this could be somebody that maybe you have had a very normal 9-to-5 job throughout the entirety of your Neptune, the 9th house transit, and you've just been going on your own personal spiritual journey. But now that Neptune transits your 10th house, you can't do this mundane job anymore. You can't just go through the rhythm of things anymore, right? You need to actually take what you've learned and make a career out of it. You know, that can be a very literal way that this translates. Also, you may question your life trajectory. Basically, you're doing a career that's more creative. You may have a clouded vision of what you are doing or what you want to be or where you want to go with your life. Okay, you're going to really kind of rethink your whole legacy. You once thought you knew exactly what you wanted for your life, your career, and your legacy, and now all of a sudden you don't. This may even be a situation where your child that you had when Neptune was in your 7th house is now older, and you're now like, you know, you're now seeing your legacy play out in front of you, and you don't have as much control over it because it's now being passed down onto your children. That can also be a theme with Neptune going through your 10th house. Having a public image that's more mystical and elusive and confusing, a little bit more all over the place. You're a little bit more unreliable in your career than you were before. You're a little bit more haphazard. You're a little bit more scatterbrained even. You keep on forgetting to do things. You are missing more details than you have before, but you are a lot more spiritually in tuned. So if you were doing a career that requires you to be more creative or Neptunian or artistic or spiritual, this is amazing because your powers and your antenna will be even better and stronger than ever, okay? But it can be hard to do those Virgoan tasks. Oversharing on the internet, I think, is a huge thing with Neptune going through the 10th house, because you have a loss of boundaries with your job. Be careful of not giving all of your time and energy to your career and draining yourself. This is another one of those things where, you know how in Neptune in the 4th house, you may need to give up your career for your home life or your family. With Neptune in the 10th house, you may struggle with that work-life, home-life balance so much that you may need to give up your family or your home life for some reason for your career. Or you may feel like your career drains you so much that you do not have energy for your home life or your family when you get home from work. You may feel more burnt out by your job or career or public image than normal. You may need more time to take breaks, relax. I hate to admit it. I'm dreading admitting this, but I have been feeling this, right? This video has taken me a lot longer to film than I expected. You see the sun. I have never had this happen to me before, but I've been filming so much I had to change out my SD card. That was very serendipitous timing. I'm just thinking about, like, this is a perfect example of Neptune going through the 10th house, right? Like, I'm at a state where I absolutely love my job and I want to give myself over to my job I genuinely do, because I enjoy it so much, and I want to put out as much content because I have so much content that I genuinely want to make, and I genuinely enjoy doing it. But I feel like it's been taking me a lot longer to make content than it normally has, or I think I've just been putting more into it, or I've been wanting to put more into it. But then I get nervous because I'm wanting to put more into it, but then the content's being delayed, and then you know what I mean? Like, there was a lot more that I wanted to do today. I really wanted to film another TikTok today, and I didn't get to that, and I'm really sad. It just is a little bit like the external 10th house things are kind of getting in my way. You know, another example is like the plumbing. We had a big plumbing issue. We had plumbers come in as an emergency thing, and they called me very last second, very Neptune the 10th house. They gave me no warning. They said, if we don't come right now, we can't come until at least Monday. Ha ha, you don't have water, right? So what are you gonna do? You know, in a good way. All of your dreams and manifestations of what you wanted for your life and career could come true if you are active with it, okay? Neptune is just the dreams. Neptune just gives you the dreams of what you want to make for your life and what you want your life to be. The other planets going on need to show that you're going to do that. Right? That's why it's a big deal that Saturn is also on top of Neptune right now, because it's basically saying that you will. If it's at least well aspected or well placed, or you have, you know, there's good things going on, right? So this is the time to start manifesting your career goals and achievements. What you want to make of yourself is incredibly possible right now. You just must imagine it and manifest it first. Write it out first. Like, you have to come up with the idea of what it is. That's what I've been spending a lot of times doing. What do I want to make of this? What's maybe not my end goal, but what's like a little idea of like, oh, what's my dream? Like, what would be something that I'd be so excited to do, right? Like, that's something I've really been trying to pinpoint and trying to like, you know, come up with the idea of, so then I can make it happen, right? Because I have the Saturn to make it happen. There is no longer a master plan for your life like you once thought there was. Unusual coincidences happen all the time at your job, so be open and jump on the opportunity. Some level of secrecy or mystery surrounds your reputation. You may feel like a bit of an elusive figure. Like, people might start projecting a lot of things onto you, having these ideas and like putting it onto you and things of that nature. Some projections will be correct and some might not. So you need to be wary of losing yourself to these projections, which may or may not be true, right? If the public is telling you this, if your job is telling you this, if your boss is telling you this, if all of your authority is telling you this, then it must be true, right? Right? You know what I'm also thinking now? This is very personal, sorry guys, but Neptune transiting my 10th house, right? I don't have a boss. I am my own boss. I've been struggling because I don't have anybody to ask, oh, hey, does this seem right? Or does this seem what I should do next? Or, you know what I mean? And I've been feeling like where I want to go has been very elusive, and what I should be spending my time at work, right, doing. Like, I keep on overthinking, right? Is this the video that is the most beneficial for me to be filming right now? Is this a TikTok that's the most beneficial for me to be filming right now? I'm not sure, right? That elusiveness comes in. So you can have a little bit more of unassuredness, even though your creativity is heightened, right? My problem is not that I don't have any ideas. I have too many ideas, and I don't know which one to choose. I have so many creative ideas, but I sometimes don't have the resources, which is one thing, which is very Neptune. And the other thing is that I just don't know which one to pick and which one to focus on, right? Very Neptune. Others may be seeing you not for who you really are, but for who they want to see you as, or for who they want you to be. Right? Neptune in the 10th house and expectations. This favors a job that requires compassion. If you're doing a stiff corporate job, you may not be for long. I said that's so funny. If you're doing a job where you take advantage or exploit people, with Neptune moving through the 10th, you may or may not be able to do that anymore moralistically, or you may be exposed for it. There can also be lots of themes of manipulation in your job or amongst authority or in your boss. There can be a very elusive authority figure as well. Like, TikTok feels like a very strong authority to me right now, but it's very elusive because I don't have a name or face to TikTok that keeps on, you know, monitoring my content, right? Your life, that is what I wrote. I said, your life can be whatever you want it to be now. You got rid of all the strings that held you back when Neptune was transiting your 9th house. So go, be free, find your true path. Aww. You can heal the world through your career or job, but make sure you also get that energy back to you, right? You don't have Neptune in the 4th house, so you need to make sure that you have people that you can rely on and have people that you can ask for help, instead of being the person at work that everybody always goes to ask for help 4, right? Very like counselor therapist energy. You need a lot of confidence and self-assurance with this transit, as it's easy to lose yourself to this transit. You may struggle with a work-home life balance and have no boundaries in your job. A good example is I work from home, and it's just sometimes really hard to have other people take it seriously that I do work from home and that I do have certain times that I set aside to do something, and people definitely demand me to have, on both ends at my work and home life, demand me to have an incredibly flexible schedule. And I really try to be, you know, Neptune in the 10th house, as adaptable with my schedule as possible. But sometimes I do feel like it can get very extreme with the demands. Like even with this plumbing situation, it was a situation where my landlord was like, well, no matter what, when the plumber calls you, they have to come. It was kind of like that sort of obligation, and like obligations where, you know, because I don't have boundaries, because I don't go to a physical job location, it's hard to set boundaries in my workplace. It is very hard. You know, I try really, really hard. I am capable of setting boundaries, but I'm not capable of, like, you know, I have Pisces, midheaven, Neptune transiting 10th house, right? Maybe you can set boundaries, but you can't force people to not step over them. You know, you can only do so much. You know, I'm not going to lose my house to this situation, right? If you're just popping in, yes, it is very dark. It's pretty late. It's mood lighting, some might say. Anyways, Neptune transiting the 11th house. So you are coming from Neptune transiting your 10th house. Now that you've created and cultivated this Neptunian reputation, it's time to create a community and army now. Rah! Create your own spiritual army. Is very like Neptune in the 11th house, or be a part of a spiritual army. Very Neptune in the 11th house. Well, especially in Aries is kind of why I'm saying that. But I'm saying army in a funny way because it's very like Aquarian also, right? Because it's like a giant group or club or community. Okay, now that you've cultivated this creative / spiritual identity, it's time to connect with that community as well, right? Now that you've made your name for yourself, it's time to start networking yourself and putting yourself out there and meeting other big names in whatever creative Neptunian community you wound up partaking in for your public image while Neptune was transiting your 10th house. Neptune transiting the 11th house adds fantasy, imagination, and elusivity to your social life / online presence. You're probably going to wind up having a lot of friends that are more Neptunian, right? They're more creative on the outskirts of life. They're more, you know, in the underground. Maybe they're more druggies. Maybe they're more into astrology or yogis. Maybe they, you know, are creative artists. Whatever it is, you are probably going to be more attracted to those kinds of scenes during this time. You're more interested in niche Neptunian things and connecting with people online or through communities that also follow your same Neptunian interest. Friends become more elusive. You might also have a friend group that becomes interdependent. You might also have a friend group that becomes like found family, right? Maybe you feel as though you don't have a family. You don't have that. Maybe Neptune really wiped out this family legacy that you thought you once had. And with Neptune in the 11th house, you are now having to cultivate, you know, this found legacy through families, through online presence, through social media, whatever it may be. Maybe during this Neptune in the 11th house transit, you get outcasted by your family and you now don't have an elusive place that you feel like you fit in anymore to the culture or to the community. Maybe back in the day, this was like an energy where people got exiled. You know, cult-like religions or belief systems can come up very easily. So be cautious. You are very susceptible to being involved in a cult, or, you know, kind of similar to 9th house Neptune, or like praising a false deity, or having somebody say they're a spiritual leader, but they're not. Also be cautious of not losing yourself to a group or this group or community so much that you become a part of like a hive mind or a collective mind. You can really lose your own opinions, lose your political beliefs. You know, they can kind of, you know, become much foggier, and you again start realizing the interconnectedness of everyone and everything. And it can be hard to dedicate yourself to just one staunch political belief, you know, one staunch belief system. You kind of realize that they're all kind of connected. Maybe you get more interested in history and you get more interested in studying, you know, politics or these 11th house, you know, sociological topics. Sociology is going going to be huge during this energy transit for you. You know, these topics to kind of start to understand people and break down people and analyze people, and you know, because people and groups become foggy to you. They don't make as much sense to you. The social rules and guidelines for things are become very confusing. Maybe you thought you started to really understand and comprehend these social rules and guidelines, but then you realize that you actually didn't, and you really didn't know what you were talking about. Maybe politics have changed so much throughout your life that during this transit, you thought you understood this stuff, and now you don't. You don't anymore. You're realizing that the information you thought that you had and that you knew that you based your opinions off of was false and demystified and things of that nature. So this can be a real like thought form transformation, belief pattern thought transformation, right? You may struggle with boundaries in friendships as well, with like friendship boundaries online or boundaries in social media. You know, again, this can be a very like oversharing placement as well, but I'd see it more like, you know, like oversharing on Twitter, you know, kind of like it's very like typey, conversationally debatey, oversharing on Reddit. Like it's more like that kind of energy, right? Friends may become flaky or inconsistent, and you may become this way as well. Maybe because your friends are just more, you know, kind of eclectic people. Friends or groups may become disoriented with you. So like friends and groups can struggle to see you clearly. Maybe you feel like sometimes you get lost in the hustle and bustle of people and things. Maybe you're feeling like you don't stand out as much. That might be also a theme. Maybe you're feeling like you're kind of fading into the background a little bit because Neptune does dissolve things, right? This is another sort of bleeding heart kind of energy. You may see everyone as a friend and not understand that some strangers don't have your best intentions at heart. You may start to become a little bit more susceptible. Again, that's why you're more susceptible to like cults and like false deities. You may become more susceptible to putting friends and people and these groups on a pedestal. And again, they have a far way to fall when you do, right? Misplaced loyalties and odd peer pressures can get the best of you. How you view the world and the society will completely dissolve and change. You will yearn to be understood by a collective or a group of people. You yearn to understand like group empathy and group love is very much like a Neptune in the 11th house theme. I said, your friends may be artists, dreamers, schemers, no good doers. Maybe they're a choker, they're a smoker. Maybe they're a midnight toker, you know? I'm sure though they don't want to hurt no one. You know, it's very 11th house Neptune coded. As far as the friends that Neptune in the 11th house will have are people like somebody that has Neptune in the 10th house conjunct their Libra sun in the 11th house, right? That's going to become your friend, the person that wrote this song, and you as the 11th house are going to attach to that person and their way of living, right? This is a deeply analytical and contemplative energy. It's extremely expansive, extremely boundless. The leaps and bounds that you will see and reach in your life are not understood by many people. I imagine many people think you are spacing out when you are probably actually thinking about deeply complicated topics and the intricacies of social etiquette. You may be less aware of social rules and social boundaries than you once were. Watch out for friends that drain you of your energy though. Again, an energy vampire sort of thing. You also may lose yourself to the collective conscious. This may be a real identity issue sort of transit. Okay, maybe because you become so popular during your Neptune in your 10th house that you now lose yourself to the projections that people have placed on you, and you do not know where you start and where those projections that people have put on you end. You may set astronomically high dreams for yourself. Be cautious because you can be disappointed, because your dreams are dreams like saving the world, creating world peace, and it's not something that somebody can do single-handedly, right? And so you can put too much pressure on yourself to try to fix the world, heal society, and that's just not something that one person can do alone. So that's why I said it can just be really demoralizing maybe even when you don't reach those goals because you had such high hopes for yourself. But understand that, you know, it takes an army, right? Honestly, I was like, this is a time to be a hippie. This is a time where you're like, friends with the drugs, the clubbers, the ravers. Like, embrace it. You know what I mean? Escaping through friends. I even put, maybe your family is strict or they're very religious. And so the only time you get to be yourself is when you're with your friends. And so maybe you escape when you get to hang out with your friends or socialize. This can also be a lot of escaping to the internet. You know, a lot of escaping online, avoiding your problems by going online and TikTok doom scrolling. You know, being chronically online is also huge, huge, huge with this energy. But yes, if you've experienced this transit recently, or you're about to, or you have been currently, does this resonate? Do you feel like these themes might come up? What are your experiences with this transit? I'd love to know in the comments down below. All right. Wow, 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 we're here, guys. This is the final transit. We have Neptune transiting through the 12th house, okay? This is another one that I think is a big one. So we're coming from the 11th house. You have dreamed and expanded as big as possible. You have truly tried to reach to the universe and back. So now it's time to kind of just stay home and reflect on all that has happened in your life, honestly. You know, this is a super reflective transit. This is a super, this is the contemplative of all contemplative energies. This can be some serious isolation, honestly. Maybe with Neptune going through your 11th house and all the complicated relationships with friendships and the disillusion of some friendships, now maybe you feel a little alone. Maybe you feel like you don't really have anybody. You know, maybe you have gone so chronically online that you don't know anybody in real life. Maybe you have lived such a public life with Neptune transiting your 10th and 11th that you now need some time and space to hide away and live the rest of your life in peace and solace and contemplation. This is beautiful. I hope my life goes this way. I'm being honest with you. You know, maybe you went through a time where you were very science and fact-based with Neptune transiting your 11th house. And now this is forcing you to open up to more spiritual ideas and religion and faith and belief in things that aren't of this world, right? Maybe you met a bunch of friends that were really into the clubbing and drug scene, and you used to do drugs and party recreationally when Neptune was in your 11th house. But when Neptune comes in your 12th house, you realize that you actually have an addiction and that this is a problem and you have a dependency. And now you may be realizing that you're isolating yourself because of your drug problem. Maybe you're isolating yourself because of mental health issues. So with Neptune in the 12th house, this is Neptune's domain. This is Neptune in its home house. This is crazy, spooky, scary, and not hilarious, honestly. Neither was that joke, so it's, you know, it works. Fantasies on top of fantasies, delusions on top of delusions, escapism on top of escapism, seclusion on top of seclusion, spirituality on top of spirituality, dreams on top of dreams, beliefs on top of beliefs. I can go on and on. This is also maybe an extremely religious time or an extremely spiritual time. You know, Neptune in the 11th house, I think of it much more like scientific-y, graphy based spirituality. And I think of Neptune in the 12th house as more intuition-led spirituality. So this is definitely a time to get more in touch with your intuition, more in touch with your gut feeling, trust your surroundings a little bit more, trust your intuition a little bit more, but more before you trust it, you need to develop it and do work on it, right? That's what Neptune in the 12th house is about. It's about realizing that you have an intuition, realizing that you do have some kind of psychic energy in you and kind of working on it, right? This is a time where you're developing your spiritual intuition. So while Neptune's in your 12th house, this can be a time where you are a little bit delusional. So I would say that while Neptune is in your 12th house, this is a time that's really good to sit and contemplate and develop your spiritual and psychic intuition. And when Neptune branches out and crosses over your first house, that is the time to really start putting it out there and making it your identity, right? If you want to. Well, whether you want to or not, it might happen. You might go through a spiritual breakthrough or an ego death or something along those lines. Pay attention more to signs and signals and elusive things that are typically unseen. Your projections have projections, okay? Your fantasies have fantasies, okay? So you probably really don't know what's real and what's fake anymore. The line was never even a straight line to begin with. You know, at least with Neptune in the 7th house, there was a straight line to begin with. There was a black and white. With Neptune in the 12th house, there was never one to begin with. It was always this distorted, foggy lens is how it can feel. I also said maybe nobody is projecting upon you, so you wind up projecting upon yourself. I also said it's the end of a cycle. You're putting a focus on all the delusions you and your family and friends and ancestors have had up to this point and closing the door to it. The first house brings a whole new set of ideals and delusions. So with it being in the 12th house, it's all about closing the door to the ones from your past. Clearing out any leftover karma, a spiritual cleaning or cleansing, some might say. Now this will take place over a very, very long time. And I think this is one of those transits that who you were as a person, you're not the same. Well, that's obvious. That's true with any Neptune transit. But I just feel it's so much more monumentous when something's going from the 12th house to the first house. It is a literal rebirth. Like, yes, whenever Neptune transits into a new house, it's like a little mini rebirth. And whenever it transits into an angular house, you know, it's like a little bit of a rebirth with maybe some special feathers on it, right? But when I feel like it goes through from the 12th to the first, this is the real thing, right? You know? So yeah, extremely imaginative and creative. If you are a Neptunian person, this transit will not feel that odd. You may feel more at peace and at home with the seclusion and reflection taking place. If you are not a Neptunian person, this can feel like a nearly impossible transit. You are not able to go out as much, be validated, explore. You are stuck in isolation, living with the debts of your past. Sometimes I feel like I can be a pretty good writer. Anyways, if you are someone that struggles to confront when you've been manipulative or when you've been deceptive, this will be a hard transit. If you do not take emotional or spiritual responsibility for yourself, then this will be a hard transit. And when Neptune goes in the first house, all that karma, all that muck and guck that you've built up while Neptune was transiting through your 12th house will come back to face you, okay? So any sort of, times that you feigned helpless, that will come back to bite you. If you take emotional and spiritual responsibility for this transit, it will be very rewarding. You are at your most psychic and most intuitive, probably you will ever be at, period. Right? You may go through some mental health struggles. You may go through some, do I have this mental health problem? Does my family? Do they pass it on to me? Does my brother have it? Does my friend have it? Does my partner have it? Do I have it? I don't know. I'm not getting any answers. Everything's being kept in the dark. I feel like this is a transit that I cannot explain with words, but I'm trying really hard. I feel like the whole point of Neptune through the 12th house is it being an unexplainable transit and an unexplainable experience. So if you're able to verbalize it and you've gone through it, I feel like you will probably do a little bit better than I would, because I just feel like this is a transit. It's like it's like Pluto in the 8th house, Neptune in the 12th house, Saturn in the 10th house, right? Any of those, Uranus in the 11th house, probably, like those malefics at their home placements, like you gotta go through it to know it, Okay, you also may go through some physical health struggles, but if you do during this transit, as you would, it's like 14 years, of course you're gonna go through some physical health struggles, right? But if and when you do, there is going to be an emotional and spiritual connection to it. And you have to heal the emotional and spiritual thing first before the thing on your body will go away. So just putting that out there, okay? This is a highly compassionate time. Huge themes of martyrdom, really giving yourself up to somebody or something, losing yourself to something or someone or some idea, probably losing yourself more to an idea or a concept than anything, if I'm being honest with you. Being taken care of, needing to be taken care of, but instead getting neglected. Wanting to be a little bit more neglected, but instead hyper being taken care of. Neglecting everything other than escapism can also be a thing. With all the other Neptune transits, it's like, okay, this is what you escape to. With Neptune in the 12th house, you escape from everything except for Neptune in the 12th house. Like when you do anything other from Neptune in the 12th house, you feel like you're escaping from the transit. Is that true? Am I correct in my assumption? Does it feel that way? You may feel more connected to spirit than ever, but I do think that this can be a transit that can also be evocative of like going through a coma. This kind of like in between, near death experience, the in between reality and fantasy. And life and death will be blurred, okay? And like you will have these very transcendental experiences. This is an energy that I think will, it's giving like, and it's most like elementary kindergarten, it's giving like Harry Potter shifting or whatever that that big like trend was. Yes, have you shifted to Hogwarts? It's giving Neptune in the 12th house. I feel like the like 12-year-olds that were running around doing this trend were definitely Neptune in the 12th house, Neptune in the 8th house kids. Like, let's be honest. Okay. Anyways, yeah, that's very Neptune. Neptune in the 12th house is also like disassociating. It's just okay. Look up Neptune, all those themes, that's what you'll be going through. Look up the 12th house, all those themes, that's what you'll be going through. So if you have gone through this transit, or if you're going through this transit, or you're about to go through this transit, let me know your thoughts down below. If what I said resonated, or if what you think, or what I said feels like it might going forward. Let me know, you know, anything I missed out, because I know I did, down below. I always gotta love your guys' input, and I feel like I learned so much through your comments, so thank you again. And just again, I sell birth chart readings on my website, Shaina Emily, and I have an astrology TikTok at shaina.emily. So yes, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the shit out of you guys. I wish you nothing but the best with these Neptune transits. Let's see if we can survive them. Literally. Woo! Okay.